Welcome to Growing You, a part of LaGrave CRC's adult education program. Today we will be hearing from Dr. Wiebe Boer, the new president of Calvin University. He will be talking about his background and what drew him to Calvin, as well as his thoughts on faith formation at Calvin.
So we have a guest here, Dr. Wiebe Boer. Welcome. Wiebe is the 12th president of Calvin University. Well, he's the second president of Calvin University, but the 12th president of Calvin. And the other day, during the inauguration, there were 4 presidents, past or current presidents, in the room, fully a third of them all, which was pretty amazing. So we have him here today. I think it's important for people to get to know someone like Wiebe, but we're not here just because we're a nice country club or a social gathering. So hopefully this has some edification to it too. This is Growing You, and we're sponsored by the Spiritual Formation Committee, and so maybe some of that will happen this morning. But like family visits, you can't have a good family visit if you don't know each other. So let's get to know each other. Tell us about your life. I'm sure most of us here have read things, but you know, you had an amazing life. You've done a lot of things, but maybe starting with your connections to the CRC and your parents and how you grew up.
So good morning, it's great to be here. I'm sure I have been in this church before, probably as a little missionary kid, wearing Nigerian dashikis and singing songs in Hausa. So you probably have, some of you have seen me before, or met me before. So I grew up on the mission field. I was blessed to grow up on the mission field. And it is one of the most amazing ways to grow up. My parents were both born in the Netherlands, so just the sort of pretty typical CRC story. Immigrated to North America after the war, went to Calvin, met at Calvin. And then my father was in Calvin Seminary planning to, you know, after graduation go to Western Canada and pastor a CRC church. That was the plan. He had immigrated to Vancouver Island. And then a missionary named Eugene Rubing, I'm sure many of you know that name, came through the seminary and said, on the mission field we have doctors and engineers and teachers and everything else, but we don't have as pastors. And the Nigerian church is growing so fast that we need pastors to just come out and help us with even basic sort of Bible school training for these evangelists and so on. And so my dad went home, said to my mom had immigrated here, so she grew up in Grand Rapids, and said she would go to Nigeria. So they had to pull out the map. They had no idea where it was. And they decided to go, and that was their call. And so they followed it, and they ended up staying for 30 years. So I was blessed to be born there in Nigeria. Even the doctor that delivered me was a CRC missionary, Glenn Verbrugge. Does anyone know Glenn Verbrugge? See, you can't out-CRC me. And then I grew up in Nigeria. I went to Hillcrest School, the mission school there, and had CRC missionary teachers all the way through. Hillcrest superintendent now is still a CRC missionary. And then from Hillcrest, I then came to Calvin and did a degree in history. From here, went to Yale, did a PhD in history. And then after 10 years of studying history, I proceeded to never do anything with it. But with my solid liberal arts education from Calvin, I spent a career for about 20 years in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, working for World Vision. Anyone else here ever worked for World Vision? I've worked in Kenya for McKinsey and the Rockefeller Foundation. I've worked in Nigeria most recently. So I went back to Nigeria 12 years ago, but in Lagos. But if anyone knows anything about Lagos, Nigeria, having grown up in Jos, it's sort of like being from Grand Rapids and then moving to New York, right? So it's like the last place you ever want to go to. Lagos has 25 million people and 3 bridges, even though it's all islands, lagoons, and all that. So imagine, I think even Grand Rapids has more than 3 bridges, right? So it's a place of incredible energy, but also incredible chaos. But it's a place that you learn how to be. You learn about leadership, about resilience. It's also one of the most dynamic Christian cities in the world. 10 to 15 million Christians there. and some of the fastest growing churches in the world are coming out of Lagos. So pretty soon I'm sure there'll be pastors from Lagos and churches from Lagos here in Grand Rapids. But it's just been an amazing experience that I've now kind of brought back with me here to lead Calvin during this time.
And before we move on, tell us a little bit about the Christian Reformed Church in Nigeria, size-wise and whatnot.
So the story of the Christian Reformed Church in Nigeria is actually one of the most successful stories of any missionary movement anywhere in the world, and it's something that we should celebrate. How many former missionaries to Nigeria are here? I just met one. Okay, so just a handful, but there's so many of them still in the communities. And what the church that we started, that our community started, has 3 denominations. One is the NKST, which is the TIV denomination in Benue State. Then there's the Christian Reformed Church of Nigeria in Taraba State, and then the Reformed Christian Church of Nigeria, also mostly in Taraba. Together, combined, guess how many people they have? How many members? Just wild guess, anyone? No? Raise your hand. Sorry? 1 million? 300 million? No, okay. So it's 2 million, right? So it's 10 times the CRC, right? So when people talk about, okay, the numbers of the CRC, I always have to remind them, don't forget in Nigeria there are 2 million, right? So the largest CRC church in the world is probably 5,000 people, right? So I think just always keep that in mind, that these are the denominations that we built. But what they're facing is very different than what we are facing. So these churches are mostly in 2 states in Nigeria that are on the periphery of where the Islamic world meets the Christian world. And over the last 5 years in particular, they've been under endless onslaught by Islamic insurgents, some of them sponsored by the government, as a way to Islamicize all of northern Nigeria. And so these churches, the things they're concerned about are survival. Am I going to be able to even farm this year? Will my children be able to go to school? Will there be health care? So I mean, these are real threats that they live with every day. So keep these churches in your prayers because they are growing fast and very influential. The 2 states that they're dominant in, the state governors are from these churches, right? So we're actually even more politically powerful in Nigeria than we are here. Taraba State, you can't be governor if you're not from the Christian Reformed Church of Nigeria. That's how influential we are. And so pray for these communities as they are facing real threats to survival, but they're still growing and growing and growing.
If this was totally scripted, I wouldn't do what I'm about to do, but it's not totally scripted, although I do have notes here. And we want to get to some important things, but another important thing that we should know a little bit about is at least your family. You're a family man, you're a dad. Tell us about your family.
Yeah, so my wife is named Joanna, and she'll be at the service later. So she's from Trinidad and Tobago. Has anyone here been to Trinidad and Tobago? You guys don't travel. Okay, yes, thank you, good, okay. All right, so her parents are church planters and missionary leaders in Trinidad. She came to Calvin, and then we met at Calvin. And then, we've been all over the world together. And then we have 4 sons, ranging from age 8 to 19.
Okay, so most of the people here, at least some of the people here, probably know that I'm a lawyer, and I want to read to you what Calvin's formative documents say about what it is. We're going to talk about Calvin, but this is a Christian Reformed Church, so we're also going to talk about the CRCNA. But the Articles of Incorporation for Calvin say that one of its purposes, its first purpose, is to provide students courses in the liberal arts, including but not limited to the sciences, history, philosophy, professional and pre-professional disciplines, and theology, which are of a positively reformed character, entirely in accord with the doctrinal standards of the CRC&A. So
I feel a difficult question coming.
So share your perspective on the relationship. There's this legal relationship, but hopefully there's more than that. between the denomination and the university?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm very, very deeply CRC, as you heard. And so I've seen that Calvin and the denomination, like the denominational ministries, is not that connected, or they're not that connected. And so I'm working to reconnect. Everything from the mission organization, what is it called? I still think of it as CRWM. What is it called now? Resonate. Something as simple as, okay, our career office needs to be connected to Resonate so that they can recruit our students as missionaries and interns. And our students can know about the opportunities there. In addition, what can our global campus that provides, continuing education online provide to missionaries in the field, right? When I was growing up, anytime my father or mother wanted to go and study something, we would be totally disrupted. We'd have to leave Nigeria, go somewhere for 6 months, be in a place we didn't want to be. And it just, but through the global campus, we could actually make that a lot easier and make missionaries a lot more effective. They can do this while they're on the mission field. Just basic stuff like that. In addition, how can we work more closely with the denomination to kind of promote Calvin as the school of the denomination? Calvin is actually now subsidizing the church. We get about $1.5 million in ministry shares, and we subsidize Calvin CRC students to the tune of $4 million a year. So the relationship we used to have where the church was subsidizing the university is now the other way around. And so and also only 29% of the students at Calvin now are CRC students, right? So if you add up international students and North American ethnic minority students, they outnumber CRC. So Calvin has changed a lot, but there's still incredible value in that connection with the church. And it's something that I want to continue to foster and strengthen, because I think we're all better off together.
The human sexuality report, and then the conclusions that Synod reached included a call to, first of all, continue dialogue among scholars and research into the fields of biblical studies and the biological and social sciences, this relating to the topic of human sexuality. So talk about what Calvin's role is, or what you would envision Calvin's role is in responding to that call of Synod.
Another interesting question. Okay. So
I have notes, but we didn't practice this.
Yeah. All right.
I didn't know if he'd show up.
Yeah. No. Oh, I have something else I have to go to quickly. So, yeah. I mean, look, this is it's one that we're navigating. I didn't expect to come to run Calvin and then spend 25% of my time on this particular issue. And I hope that we can move on from it soon. So we have gone through the initial process that we needed to go through based on the Synod decision, and we've followed all the rules that are already in place. But in terms of what else Calvin needs to do, what I want Calvin is we need to invest even more in the pastoral care element, because we need to be safe for all students, right? And that's what Christianity is all about. That's what brought my parents and so many other missionaries to Nigeria, because of that. And we can't not do that in our own university. So we already have actually one of the best support systems in place, and we need to do more of that. And I think we can demonstrate how you can maybe have a certain view on homosexuality, but you can still love everyone. And that's what I want Calvin to be the place to demonstrate that.
In your inaugural, you presented a list of ands, rejecting the idea of either or, and you spoke about the missing middle, not the muddy middle or whatever, messy middle, but the missing middle. And if you didn't hear his inaugural speech, I'll just give you the list, because it's very interesting. Dutch and diverse, excellent and exciting, conservative and controversial, progressive and pious, gritty and grace-filled, orthodox and original, renewed and renewable. There was one more, but we'll talk about that later. What was going through your head when you wrote that and gave that?
So, for the last 20 years since my wife graduated from Calvin, we've not been in this community. We've been in places around the world where there weren't Calvin or CRC communities. And so I watched it from a distance as the U.S. society divided itself. And I came back to find that our church has done the same. And we shouldn't. There's no need for that, because look at the great things we've done as a church by working together. And so that's sort of a challenge to us that, okay, even if you are very conservative, it's fine. You can still be a bit controversial. Even if you're quote unquote progressive, you can still be pious. And we need to figure out how to reconnect and agree to disagree, and then move on as a united church and a united university, and not let the kind of division in society divide us. And that was what the message was. The other is Dutch and diverse. We've actually done that at Calvin. But I think we need to do that in the denomination too. And then the rest of the list, what was it? Excellent and exciting. There's the reputation of Calvin is that we're really boring, right? Because we're so focused on just being excellent. So let's be excellent and have a little fun too. So that's sort of what I'm getting at.
You mentioned following the rules or something to that effect. One of those rules, if you will, one of those documents that Calvin has is a document called Confessional Commitment and Academic Freedom, which, by the way, has been either approved by or at least commended by Synod. Tell us about that concept, which some people might think is an oxymoron, confessional commitment and academic freedom. I mean, to what extent can academic freedom survive or live, if that's a good thing, while remaining confessionally committed?
Well, okay, so Calvin is the University of the Christian Reformed Church, and so we must follow the confessions of the Christian Reformed Church. But within that, there's room to disagree and agree and explore and learn and study. And I actually think that's fantastic. And it makes Calvin such a unique part of the church and such an important part of the church community. And it's actually what has made Calvin such a recognized and respected academic institution, that there is room for debate, there is room for deeper study. And we've been able to push the boundaries on so many fields of study for decades, and we need to continue to do that.
So the last "and" on your list was football and football. Originally, when I didn't realize that Calvin was going to approve having a football program, I was going to ask you about this, and you were going to say, well, we do have football, and you were going to, of course, mean soccer. And then the board ruined that by approving football, so we actually...
You are part of the board.
So, why football?
So we actually now have football, and football. So, because Calvin has a soccer football team, and the actual correct term for what you call soccer is association football. So it is actually soccer football. And then there's American football, and we have a rugby football team as well already. So we're gonna have football, and football. But why football at this time?
Why American football?
American football. So I know this is something that's been debated at Calvin again and again and again and again. And I may be the first Calvin president that has never actually watched an American football game, because I don't get it. I don't get it. A sport that you stop every 10 seconds to regroup and then discuss and strategize. I mean, as a former consultant, I respect it, but it's not a sport. And then all the padding, watch rugby, man. Those are athletes. Anyway, that's just my view. So this was done purely with no emotion, because I have no emotional attachment to the sport. But first, the economics made sense. Second, my provost took me to a Christian high game and said, just look at the atmosphere here and the spirit and how it brings the community together. And I saw that, but I only stayed for 20 minutes. And so the first time I'll ever watch a full American football game will be our first competitive match. But then the third was that it could also generate an opportunity for a marching band, which then can really enhance the music department and start bringing back the music department as part of our focus on reviving the humanities and the liberal arts part of Calvin. So that was all part of the calculation. And I think it's totally the right decision at this time.
So let me follow up here. So you talked about reviving the humanities. Now I know that if you have 3 students who are interested in classical languages, it's hard to have 4 professors. We all get that. But talk about the importance of the humanities and what you're envisioning in terms of strengthening them at Calvin.
So yeah, I mean, sort of market forces have made it difficult, just as you're saying. So we've had, Calvin has had to cut some programs, and some of the departments are still struggling to get students. But what I've seen is there are some departments that are philosophy in particular, which has always been one of our strongest and most amazing departments. And it's much smaller now, but we still have amazing philosophy profs that are influencing society in major ways. But they're being very practical and pragmatic. So, for example, there's one who's an expert he focuses on the ethics of food systems. So that's what he teaches on, and then students who aren't interested in Aristotle and Socrates will actually attend his class and then still learn about Aristotle and Socrates and everything else. And there's another one who's an expert on the ethics of disability. So he teaches on that and gets all sorts of students who would otherwise not take a philosophy class. So it's what we're encouraging all of the humanities departments, that in addition to the core offerings that everybody has to take, they need to be sort of updating what they're focusing on to the interests of what our students today are interested in. And I think that will help. We are also working on a plan. We actually have a donor who has committed $5 million to a school of humanities, but he needs 2 other donors to each write a $5 million check also. So if there's anyone have a $5 million check for humanities? Nobody raises their hands here. So
we're very non-demonstrative.
I can see that.
You'll see that at 11 o'clock.
I can see that, yeah.
When we stoically stand up and sing our hymns.
Yeah, well, when I grew up, so in Joss, where I grew up, there wasn't a CRC church, at least when I was younger, and so we went to an Anglican church, very traditional Anglican, still in their form tradition. And we joked that when people started getting a bit charismatic, they lowered the ceiling fans. They actually, they actually literally did. But yeah, humanities. I mean, I'm a history PhD, history major, and it equipped me to do so many things that I probably couldn't have done if I had only studied. Let's say, most people think I should have gotten a business and finance degree based on where my career took me, but I was able to be in business and have a different view of everything than anyone, than those around me. So there's incredible value to it, and we are going to be very strategic to rebuild it and reinvigorate it, because it's a very important part of what Calvin is and what makes our students so amazing. And you ask employers this: why do you like Calvin students over others? It's because the engineers are also historians and philosophers. Our nurses know about religion, and the link between faith and healing. And so it just really makes all of our students, whether they're in professional programs or humanities, better. But then I think we also need to push the needle a bit in that what is liberal arts, right? I also would like a history student to have a bit of entrepreneurship training, because the world is very entrepreneurial now. So I think we can cross-fertilize, and the professional programs can influence the humanities and vice versa.
You mentioned having a PhD in history, which you obtained from
Yale.
Which is ranked what in your mind in terms of graduate schools?
Number 1.
Okay. So if Yale's number 1, what is your vision for Calvin in terms of ranking among Christian universities and colleges?
Okay, so right now we are like 30th in that ranking.
And what are the criteria? How does that?
But it's pretty loose, right? So I think number 1 is Duke. And I don't think most people associate Duke with being a Christian university. So, and I think 2 is Baylor, 3 is Notre Dame, 4 might be Emory, it's something like that. So, but we need to be in that conversation. But I have a, I think we can, I mean, so in the way the world is today, there's a lot of, we can build a lot, both our reputation, our influence through partnerships. I don't think we need to build 5 more $20 million buildings on our campus, but I think we need to be very strategic in partnering with, you know, reformed institutions in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in South Korea, in South Africa, Brazil, and enhance our influence that way, enhance our influence online. And then I also think, you know, in our community, I don't think, you know, the one thing that our communities have invested in all over North America is education. And I don't think we look at that as one thing. And I think we need to figure out how to almost see that as one of the major ways we influence society is through the amazing educational institutions, K through 12, and then through Calvin and the other reformed CRC affiliated universities, through their teaching as well. And so we've started looking at that we actually had a meeting the day before inauguration with the 7 presidents of the kind of CRC affiliated tertiary education institutions, so Dort, Trinity, Calvin Seminary, Kuiper, Redeemer and King's. And, you know, saying, okay, how do we work better together? You know, how do we, so it could be that what you're saying, like about the classics, okay, maybe they're teaching, maybe they do have those profs at Trinity, and then our students can, you know, can study with them, and we need to figure out how to turn our own educational system that we built, have greater economies of scale, so that it's almost like from kindergarten through your PhD, you're in one system, and we need to figure out how to do that. So it's not just that, you know, hundreds of different systems around the world, around North America, but I think we could create a pretty powerful force in education with Calvin kind of as the engine room of that.
So you've talked about the humanities. What about this new business school? How does that fit in?
So John Calvin's theology probably had more impact on the global economy over the last 500 years than any other thinker, in whether private or religious or whatever, other than maybe the Prophet Muhammad, in terms of influencing the way the world economy is today. And so I think the Calvin University should have a business school. And, you know, the donor for this school was an anonymous donor that we all know. But he specifically did not want his name on the building, right? So it's the Calvin School of Business, which actually is fitting because of the influence John Calvin had on global business. And so I think, you know, but we need to really push on how the business school teaches business from a Christian perspective. You know, how we teach accounting from a Christian perspective. So we are, you know, still doing that even though it's a business school, so that even our accountants and everyone else who comes out of that come out with the liberal arts underpinning and the Christian element and the reformed element. And that's all very part of the business school. So it's something that we should have had a long time ago. And I look forward to building it into, you know, one of the top business schools in the world as well.
Let's see, it's Sunday. 2 days from now is election day, and if the political pundits are right, the #1 topic on people's minds is inflation, okay? And we talk about the CPI. What does CPI mean to you?
First, let me talk about what elections mean to me. So, growing up in Nigeria, I grew up under military rule, right? So, for most of my life, I lived in a country where, for most of my upbringing, I lived in a country where you couldn't vote, right? And you couldn't choose your leaders. And no matter how messed up the political system in the U.S. is, the fact that we can go and vote and choose our leaders is incredibly powerful and is a privilege. And so so it's just something, like when I go to vote, it's very, very deep to me because of what I saw growing up. And I think if you've grown up in the U.S. and all your life you've been able to vote freely, and, you know, it's easy to take it for granted, but it is something to treasure. So everyone go and vote. That
CPI.
Okay, CPI. I was trying to avoid that one. The Calvin Prison Initiative, you mean? CPI is the Calvin Prison Initiative. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes, that's what I mean. You caught it. See, we didn't script this. But he's quick. He's quick on his feet. Tell us about what is the Calvin Prison Initiative?
Oh, so you don't actually want me to talk about inflation?
No, I don't want you to talk about it.
Nobody
wants to hear anything more
I
about
was being
inflation.
clever. Well, just on inflation.
You can talk about it.
You know, it does mean that, I mean, it means that, you know, the costs of Calvin are going up, but we're trying to doing everything we can to keep the cost down, so we're being very, very efficient I mean, we're looking at everything more from a business angle than just a purely, you know, I don't want us to run Calvin like a not-for-profit anymore. We need to be more business savvy. So inflation is an issue. But the Calvin Prison Initiative, how many of you know about this? Oh, they're brilliant. So I don't need to talk about it. So I've been to our campus at Hanlon 4 times now. How many of you have been there? Okay. All right. Obviously, we can't turn it into a tourism site, so it's not easy for everyone to go. But it is incredibly powerful if you go there. And every time I go there, I tell our students that they teach us a lot more than we teach them. And it's the only sort of fully functional undergraduate degree in a prison in Michigan, certainly, and one of the top in the US. When we had a graduation ceremony in May at the prison, it was the first time in history that a graduation ceremony of inmates for a bachelor's degree ever happened in an operating prison. So it's really trailblazing. And when you meet these students, you know, most of them are lifers. They've been in prison 20, 30 years. In that time, nobody other than when they make phone calls, nobody calls them by their name. And they're dehumanized because they're called by their number, right? And then their Calvin profs came and insisted, we will call you by your name. And it gave them humanity, dignity. And what's great is that the laws have changed, and so some of these men are now getting out because the crime they committed was before they were 18. And so, you know, they're now coming out, and they're coming out with a degree. Or some of them are coming out and they're halfway through their degree, and so then they live in a house near campus, and they finish their degree with other Calvin students. And they are the most diligent, hardworking students you can imagine, because for them this is, like what I was saying about if you grew up not being able to vote, voting means a lot. If you live for so long not having dignity, not having opportunity, it means so much. And on Canadian Thanksgiving Day, how many Canadians are here? Any Canadians? Okay, I'm Canadian, by the way. I'm also American. So I wasn't voting illegally.
Are you Dutch?
I'm also a Dutch citizen.
How many passports do you
I
have?
have 3, and my children have 4. And so it just happened, I went for the Canadian Thanksgiving dinner at the dining hall, and then I sat at a table where 2 of the Calvin Prison Initiative graduates were sitting. And talk about Thanksgiving. You know, what it meant for them. I mean, it's just like they genuinely have a second chance at life, and they're just taking it with both hands. But just sitting with them and hearing their story, hearing, you know, when they came out, again, having everyone call them by their names. You know, even that they said their beds the mattress was too soft. They slept on the floor the first month. You know, things like that. Every time they would, certain things would happen, they would think, oh, I'm going to have to go back. And one of them then, one of the ones I was talking to, he said he was the speaker at the graduation, and he said when he went back into the prison, he was so afraid that it was like a scam and that he was then going to be stuck back there, you know, and just the trauma that they've gone through, and then just to see them be out and be these like Christian witnesses, it's unbelievable. It's amazing, and it's something I inherited, but something I'm incredibly proud of. And those are the things that just make Calvin and our whole CRC community just amazing, and the impact we have in a very positive way on society.
And who saw the graduates singing the Calvin alma mater? Yeah.
There are only students who actually know it.
Yeah. And who was accompanying them on the drums? Okay.
So I was on congas, but the drummer, he was actually like an accomplished drummer that played in stadiums around the world. with some huge names that you've heard of. So he was actually pretty amazing.
But you and I have a little bit in common in terms of what we like to do with our free time.
I thought there was going to be like a drum.
I know, a drum off.
Yeah, drum off.
We don't have much time left, but you've talked about the Calvin Prison Initiative. Are there any other things that you, having come to campus, have discovered, or maybe having heard of before, have actually kind of really felt or observed firsthand that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, we have an amazing soccer team, and our #1 soccer fan is right there. Do you know he's Calvin soccer super fan? All right, thank you for always being.
And you've attended full games.
Yes. So look, when the narrative that I was hearing about Calvin when I was coming, and I've said this, and I don't want it to be taken the wrong way, but I actually felt like I was going to find buildings crumbling, and tall grass, dead, faculty not showing up for class, students that just were kind of bottom of the barrel. Like that's the way Calvin was being described out there, and I just thought, wow, this is going to be a shock compared to what it was when I was there. And then I get there and I'm like, everything is perfect. I mean, our campus is just astounding, and we have this Van Noord Arena. It's the best arena in NCAA Division III. We have 200 acres of forest on a campus in a city. And just on and on. We have a telescope. We have a tropical rainforest on campus. We have greenhouses. We have these labs. Just everything we have is just unbelievable and just world class. Our professors are amazing and dedicated. Our staff are amazing. Our students are top notch. And so somehow, I think we let others tell our story rather than us telling our own story. And part of it is, I think it's the Dutch humility, that we wanted to hold back on anything too positive. And yes, we're good at that. So I realized that the first thing that we really needed to change was just our own vision of ourselves, and then the way we were telling our story. Because that school is unbelievable. And the excellence there, I mean, I don't even know how we're ranked 29th of Christian universities. We should be in the top 10 easy. I think it's just we've allowed others to tell the story about Calvin, but it is a fantastic place. There's also a very solid just movement of spiritual movement among students. You can go to chapel on a Wednesday. Chapel is every day, but it's not mandatory. And on Wednesday, it's a sermon, and students still come in, fill the place, right? And you think about how many students, students have a lot of other things going on, and you already go to church on Sunday, and then you come on Wednesday and they still come, and they're still there. And I've had students just come and meet with me and just say, sir, we want you to know about this spiritual movement happening across campus. What you're hearing out there about Calvin being this and that is just not true. And so it's very spiritually healthy as well, and I think that's a very important message. And we have faculty that care. And you hear students who graduated 10 years ago, they talk about some faculty member who did this, this, and this for them in a way that they never saw anywhere else, all the way through grad school, whatever. Same with staff, it's amazing. And we have students that are just absolutely world class. So our student senate president, Nain Miranda, he's deeply committed Christian from Nicaragua. He's an accounting major. He also works in the dining hall. And on the side, he has a side business that he's building on cryptocurrency energy. And all these other things. And that's just an example of the kind of students we have. And so we are still developing agents of renewal in major ways, and they are really influencing society wherever they go. So the message is Calvin is in really good shape, and we need to make sure everybody knows that, and that's what we need to talk about.
Well, that's a good way to end it. It's 1:45, and that's the end of our Growing You time.
No questions from the audience?
Well, sure. Does somebody want to have a burning question? So a question about facilities and the sports.
I thought it was going to be a theological question. Okay. So very practical question. So basically our soccer pitch, because it's a grass pitch, once you get to where we are now in the season, it just gets torn up and we can't play postseason there, that kind of thing. So it's been on the books for years to try and change that to a turf pitch. And other universities around us have done this already. So we're as soon as the season is over, we'll dig it up, put turf there, turf on the field next to it, and then lacrosse and soccer will use those. And we were initially going to be waiting to raise the whole $10 million we needed for the stadiums. And I just said, how much do we have enough money to build the fields? Let's just build the fields, and we'll build the stadiums next, because we just needed it. So that's what we're doing. So by next season, we'll be using those turf fields, and then one of those fields will then become the football stadium as well. We're trying to be very pragmatic. I think in universities we often build Ferraris when we need Fords. Sorry, I know Michigan Fords are the Ferraris, but
Well, you've been alliterative all the way through today, so that's good.
so and then football, basically we're already in the process of hiring a coach, and then there'll be a kind of practice team for 23, 24, and then we'll start competing in 24, 25.
Well, now we're past time, but I haven't seen this many people stick this long for a growing youth session in a long time. And that's why we wanted to bring you here. But thank you, Dr. Boer.
Thank you very much.